May of 2013, I think it was, where it was May or April, around that time, where, you know, my car gets stolen.
April Fool's Day, I think.
Yeah, April Fool's Day, yeah. It was like a Mercedes, like an SL 500, that got stolen while I was in Chicago. And then, so I'm just still figuring things out, working for this client, and that wasn't going well. And so after about 2 weeks after that happened, he and I had a falling out where, like, this just isn't working. So I ended up having to call Carole to come pick me up. And then I'm back in Fort Wayne, and that's when that's when I'm done. You know, I hadn't been on medication for like 6-7 months now. I wasn't working. I didn't have any network in Fort Wayne, and that's when I start, like, it's just like, you know, then the isolation got magnified, and I was just like, that's when I get caught in that suicide ideation loop, which it's very hard to explain, but, you know, if you look at my resume, you'd say, hey, this guy's got options. He's got an MBA, he's got a career path, and all that. But when you're feeling that way, it's just that you don't see that. You're just living in a wall, and you're just looking to get through one day at a time, and that's hard enough. So that's when we, since I had time on my hands now, Carole was like, let's go to the chapel. So we started going to chapel, and it was like 1 week, and then the second week, and the third week. And then it's probably like by the third week, you know, I'm just really in a deplorable state, and I'm listening to Pastor Rick Hawks there. And he's just a genuine, authentic individual. And it was one day after service, you know, we were just driving back to our house, and I just turned to Carole and I said, Carole, I said, I surrender. I said, I need Jesus in my life. That's what I need.
In the car?
In the car, on the way back to the house, yeah.
At the corner of Hamilton and Illinois.
I don't know where that is.
Right at the stoplight.
Does anything happen to you in that moment?
Well, all it did was it cracked the door of hope open. It was just like, that was something that I needed to admit to somebody. I needed to admit that to Carole, and because it was something I had to surrender in order to move forward. I mean, that was your point of surrender? Yeah,
right there
that was right there. Like, that was, I mean, just saying that I needed help, that I needed God in my life, Jesus specifically in my life, to Carole, was very humbling for me. But it was the surrender, and that was just me moving forward. And so it cracked that door of hope open. It was like, okay, it was kind of like I could take a breath. I surrender. I'm on the path. I'm still in pain, but I'm on the path. And that's really what it did for me. And then so I was able to find a job with an IT service company where everybody's got computers and networks, and so anybody could be a potential client. And also it was ran by a good Christian man also. So here I just am like taking this step forward into faith, and I'm able to network throughout the community, and then also talk to the owner of the business who was a Christian. So that was very beneficial. But the big thing was the networking also, being able to just get the lay of the land and start getting involved in different organizations. Like, I had become a hospice volunteer. And it was kind of ironic because here I'm contemplating suicide, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe if I hang around with people who know they're dying, I'll see what they have to say about it. And you learn a lot. You learn a lot from people who are going through that, as far as, you know, what's important in life, what's not important in life.
Sounds like you're getting discipled and shaped a little bit on the fly.
Oh, a little bit on the fly, yeah. But then I start going through college, you know, for as far as discipling is concerned. But I'm networking. I'm going to. So there's about 3 or 4 months where I'm just like, okay, well, I'm still struggling with this. I'm still in pain. I'm still, like, every once in a while I have this thought, I could just end it tomorrow, and I could put my head down on those train tracks and I'd be done. Or I look at that building, as you're driving through Fort Wayne, that one may be tall enough. I wonder if they have an emergency exit up there or something like that, you know? And it just goes through, and Carole's a lot more in tune with it than I am, but there's the 3 stages of suicide where you're contemplating it, or you have that ideation, you're writing out a plan, or you're really putting a plan together, and then you're acting at it. I was kind of held up on that first one, but I did have that hope, and those thoughts were still there. But then I got into Celebrate Recovery at the chapel, and I don't know how I got involved in it, but I just remember seeing a bulletin or something like that. Pulled the pamphlet off the wall. That's what I did, and I looked at it, and I probably sat on it for like a day or two reading it, and I was like, I just went to Carole. I said, Carole, I've kicked a lot of these habits. Like, I wasn't drinking anymore. I wasn't a workaholic anymore. I said, but I said I hadn't done any recovery work. And I said, so I want to give this a shot. And she's like, sure.
I gotta ask though, when he surrenders in the car, are you saying anything to God there?
Oh my goodness.
I'm surrendering too, or?
I started bawling immediately, but it had been a topic of conversation with my mom and I that I had asked my mom to start talking to Tom about his spirituality, and it'd been an ongoing discussion with us. My faith now has a deeper intimacy than I ever knew, but the act of being present for worship was something that I was missing, but we had been doing that. I didn't know that there were next levels, because growing up in a Catholic environment is, you're present, it's very ritualistic, and I didn't know that there was more. So right then and there, I was just sobbing because I was thankful. I was just thankful because the person I married said to me, you die, you go in a box, that's it. Oh, okay. And so for years, we just didn't even talk about it, because that's just kind of one of those unspoken things you just don't touch anymore.
That's a big point. Here, Carole and I were pretty tight. We would talk about a lot of different things, but we had no idea. I had no idea about that chasm that was there, and that by surrendering to God, that kind of started closing up that chasm. Like when she started bawling, I'm like, well, what are you crying for? And she's just like, I thought you're going to church just for me. And I'm like, not anymore,
So what does Celebrate Recovery do for you?
Well, just walking in that first night, it was they have a normal schedule, but that night was an anniversary night, and it was in July. And so I walked in there, and so instead of the normal schedule, what they did was they had different participants popcorning testimonies. And you hear about a pastor from south of Fort Wayne who's got a pornography addiction. He's talking about this in front of about 60, 70, 80 people. And then you have the businessman who he's got his opiate addiction that he's struggling with, or fidelity issues. And I'm looking at all these people going, and then I'm clocking Rick Hawks too, because I'm like going, how's he going to accept this? Is he going to? And I was just like, wow, this is the most real, unjudgmental room I've ever been in. And then it was kind of just like this breathing, where I was just like, wow. I said, okay, this is what I've been missing. And I said, God, I was going this way, and it's failed. So I'm going to go this way, whatever that means. I'm going to lean into this and be intentional about it. And so very quickly, I started volunteering there. I started running.
You're kind of an all or nothing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would never say that, but I guess that's the case. And so I started volunteering, and then I jumped into a 12-step. And then after about a year, I was running my own 12-step. But it was very interesting. I mean, it became I started filling up my week with godly stuff, with Bible studies, and you just start doing that.
Your whole life changes.
It does.
What you value, what you prioritize changes.
Well, and then when you say like disciple in college, I mean, this is going to be interesting.
Well,
I don't know.
Before you go there,
okay.
I think that you need to point out, like, things still weren't good for us.
Oh no, that's right. We have to go back to that piece. So here we're on the path.
Just because he's accepted Jesus, he's working at a job making a fourth of what he's made. I'm not working. We have mountains of debt, and then I get sick.
That's true. Yeah.
I get bacterial meningitis, Lyme's disease, West Nile, and Bell's palsy. I almost die.
Yeah.
And the saving grace is this little company he works for had 100% Blue Cross Blue Shield coverage for the spouse and husband, but I almost die. And I had just gotten hired at the chapel part-time, and they hold the job for me. But it's at that point where, like, now we have this network. Like, the church community comes around, just comes full force and supports us. But we were still dealing with this mountain of debt that we were holding on to. And then the hospital takes it over the edge for us. And then we're looking at bankruptcy. And I'm mortified. I'm ashamed. I'm completely, like, I had dealt with the early stages of the materialism, but now I'm dealing with the aftermath of, I've just ruined our credit. Like, it's gone. Now, the last thing that we've held on to, so God has stripped me of my tendency for workaholism, my identity for self through materialism. He takes away my health. He takes away my belief in my husband at the time to provide for me. And now we have nothing left. So for me, as he's rising up, we're faced with the reality of, oh my goodness, like, life really is changing. And it was through that complete brokenness of where it finally, I think some of our final chains kind of fell away, of just saying, this is who we are. And sitting there and confessing that to my pastor and to my future boss that we're going through a bankruptcy, and the shame that was there for me. And so even though Tom's in Celebrate Recovery, I'm there, I'm helping serve, I'm doing the hospitality for it, I'm learning with him of the lessons of transparency.
Wow. So you both are growing spiritually, Celebrate Recovery. You're through all that, you're leading a 12-step group.
Right.
And what finally brings you to the point of healing that allows you to start the landing?
Well, I was getting really, I was really appreciative of the gentleman that I was working for, and I was doing a lot of networking and that build up. That was very helpful, and also being able to talk about God, that was helpful. But just more and more, it was really prevalent that I was not fit for, like, I just did not want to be in that world anymore, the business world anymore, or just not in that way. And so I started just open-handedly, looking. I said, I don't even know who I am. I don't know what I like. Anytime I took a profile test or whatever, I'd lie on it and I'd get the job. So, and maybe the profile really showed who I actually was, but I thought I was lying. So my intentions behind it were not correct, so not true. So I just didn't even know, who I was and what I liked. So I took a profile. Carole started working at the chapel, and the chapel, had the profiles, live styles, Denny Howard's profile. Sure. So she took one. I said, okay, I pray about it. I'm gonna breathe. I'm gonna take one as honestly as I can take it. And so I take one of those profiles, and it starts saying that I'm a social person, and it starts saying all these things. I'm like, and I couldn't even read it. I couldn't even read it, the thing, to be honest. So I actually am talking to Paul Gilbert, and I was like, Paul, I said, so I got this profile. He said, let me introduce you to somebody. He introduces me to Steve Longbreak, and I'm sitting in Steve's office, and Steve's looking at it going, well, you'd either make a great salesman or a great preacher. He said either or pastor. He said you make a great salesman or a great pastor based upon this. And I'm like, well, I don't even see that path, in my mind thinking, Carole says, I had been baptized. She said, oh, he's going to be a pastor.
On Easter,
yeah.
Tom decides now from July of when you started and Celebrate Recovery to Easter. Was that the time frame?
Actually, so it was, I think, yes, it was probably following. So it was the following year at Easter is when I got baptized, and she had said he's going to become a pastor.
I turned to everybody. I said, I just know that this.
You really did?
Oh, I really did. I called it. I told it to my mom. I told everybody at the church. I said he's going to be a pastor, and we were part of it's called Cardboard Testimony.
Yeah, I know.
And it was the first time that I'd ever stood in front of an entire congregation and said, I get my self-worth, from God rather than materialism. And Tom was free from isolation because everything could be brought back to that isolation for him, and it was. It's so hard to. It gets kind of jammed up time-wise of where it happens, of when the talks with Dwayne started happening, of the dream.
Well, it was, so basically what happened was, it was just so interesting when I surrendered. I got to a point where I said, I'm not sure what I want to do, and I'm talking to other people at the chapel, and I was just like, I'm just going to throw the oars in the water, take down the sail, and just open-handedly, see where the boat takes me. The first person I actually spoke to was Gordon Bell. I'm sitting in his office. I'm sitting.
All my friends are
I'm
coming
telling
around.
you, this is very interesting. It was Dwayne. Dwayne, actually, this is very interesting because Dwayne told me about his interview with you. And so I'm pulling it up online, I'm looking at it, and that's when I first emailed you, actually, because I saw that Dwayne had spoken to you, and then Gordon Bell was online, and I knew Gordon, and I emailed you, actually, and I introduced myself, and I said, I really like the gritty testimonies, and you gave me a list of like 3 or 4 to look at.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
But then, so I'm having a meeting with Gordon, where Gordon's the first businessman who actually prayed for me in his office, and I'm just like, wow. I was like, you can pray outside of church, like with somebody and not be, And then it was the profile, and then it was Steve Longbreak. And then right after Steve Longbreak, while I'm going through Celebrate Recovery, Carole's going through something called CTO, Call to Obedience.
Call to Obedience. That's an intense commitment.
It is. And so she's just changing dramatically. Yeah. And I've been through the 12-step, and I went through a discipleship walk, and Carole and I both really enjoyed the discipleship walk at the chapel. It was transformational. But and I wanted to get back to that thing where Carole and I were doing something together, like together but separately, you know, like the discipleship walk was. And so I asked her about CTO, and she said, well, let me see if I can find a mentor for you. And so the mentor ended up being Carl Mollering. And so here at this, I'm just like these juggernauts of faith in this community. And
Incredible.
so Carl and I, we start meeting like weekly, going through CTO. And so he was really the bridge where it was like, Tom, you know, he would listen to me talk about, okay, well, I don't like this anymore. And he was just like, Tom, prayerfully, open-handedly. And then so as I'm going through that process, it was like 2014, going into 2015, Rick Hawks tells me about the Bethel College at the chapel. And so I get into Bethel. The first class that I take is ministry leadership, and I have to write a business plan. And I got involved with Deb McMahon, the Allen County Health Commissioner, and she was looking for programs for teenagers, and I had presented Celebrate Recovery for Teenagers to her. She seemed interested, and at the same time I write this business plan for the landing, and that was in January, February, March of 2015, basically. And then by July, that business plan was basically 80-90% done. You know, Roger Reese from Associated Churches picked up the ministry. We started, you know, looking for funding.
Well, not only does he just pick up the ministry, but he hires you.
Oh yeah, he hired me. Yes,
but he hires you as the director of spiritual outreach.
He hires me as the director of spiritual outreach, and I'm out of the business world, and I'm working for Associated Churches. I'm in Bethel taking seminary classes, and by the last week of September, we start the landing at Come to Go, with like 6 students and a teacher from the Crossing Education Center. It was just phenomenal. It was just God, just really just, his math is a lot better than mine, you know, so it just evolved so quickly. What we've realized is we just partnered with a lot of different organizations, and we just have this, as I said, this cross-section of teenagers who are just so strong in so many different ways, but so broken in many others.
When you started really looking at, with that very first class, you were saying adults have resources, but what if I had had resources as a young person? Would I have gone here? Would it have taken me that long to be where I am now? Like, what would have happened if I had been in relationship with Jesus at a young age? Yeah. And that was that was a real pivotal point for you that I think is important to clarify.
To go reach out to teens and let them have Celebrate Recovery now.
It was, well, and that's the other side of that was, you know, here I had this resume and I had all this background and education, but, you know, even with all that, I was struck with that isolation, with that suicide ideation. And I was like, well, and that really, in addition to what Carole just said, that became the genesis of who I wanted to focus on, you know, working with these teenagers who had this intergenerational poverty, or these, you know, disruptive behavioral issues, or whatever the case may be.
Hurts, habits, or hang-ups.
Yeah, hurts, habits, or hang-ups.
How many teens do you have on Wednesday nights?
It ranges between 40 and 60 right now.
Wow. Wow. And how are you doing in your heart?
Oh, I love it. I love it because
No, the suicide.
Oh, I'm so much better. So much better. It was probably 6, 7, 8 months, and that's how it happened for me. Other people hit struck by lightning, but it was probably about 6, 7, 8 months of Celebrate Recovery where I started realizing that thought that I was having 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day, you know, even if I'm in a church service, maybe twice in a church service, just like looking up the ceiling, saying I could probably hang from that rafter. But it was about 6 months, 7 months into Celebrate Recovery where I had that thought at church, in service. And I'm like, wow, it's been like 3 months before I've had that thought. Or like you just start realizing that it's going away. You had a renewed
focus.
Right, and so now it's, I put so much faith in God, and I'm surrounded by so many godly people that my heart's great, you know. I mean, every day I'm doing stuff. God proves himself to me every day that he's around, you know.
Carole, where's your heart?
Oh, my goodness. You know, I mentioned earlier the fact that I now get to serve alongside Tom, where he's as passionate about serving the marginalized, is a gift. But to have a partner who now understands the role of what it is to be a spiritual leader, to be head of the household, to be an accountability partner in a equally yoked marriage, I had no idea. Like, I loved Tom when I married him, But the love that God has given us now in our marriage has surpassed any understanding I could have ever understood of what marriage would look like. The ability to pray together, to worship together, to write lessons together, to grow in our own discipleship. I'm discipling people now for CTO, to watch that and to know that we're both in ministry full time. Our ministry, we have separate ministries, and then we have co-ministry together. And God has shown so much fruit, releasing me just from some of those still deep-rooted insecurities that now I get to turn to Tom and we have a transparent conversation about those fears or those insecurities rather than turning to other things. It's been a blessing beyond belief. And now I'm at Remedy Live. Remedy Live is a 24-hour online crisis chat center, and actually Tom started as a soul medic before I was approached to apply. So yet again, God presented another opportunity that kind of came to me to interview when the board was looking for a director of operations.
And my baby Kelsey works with you once in a while,
She
doesn't
does,
she?
and she's awesome.
And she loves you to pieces. It's absolutely amazing how God uses the Word of God, people of God, Spirit of God to make us new again. And the people included the chapel, all my friends that we talked about, Celebrate Recovery, the call to obedience and how the Word transforms your heart and your life. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing your authenticity, your transparency, your story of not only individually, but as a couple and as a marriage, because I tell every one of my daughters, I tell every girl I coach, when it comes up, if I'm teaching the Bible in a chapel or something like that at a college or at a high school, every girl wants her guy to be her spiritual leader. And she may not be able to articulate it, maybe not really thinking about it that way, but that is how she's designed. And when that clicks, it's just amazing what that does. And your relationship is a living testament to that.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for your ministry in the landing, and may God bless you beyond all you can ask or imagine.
Thank you, Mitch.
What about you? Are you in a situation where maybe workaholism has the best of you? Are you struggling with materialism? Are you a money addict? I was each of those three things. And it seemed like the more and more I would get, the more and more I needed my fix of choice. I needed the next deal, or I didn't feel anything. And I realized there was no deal big enough. There was no amount of money large enough. There was no collection of stuff precious enough that I could ever fill and satisfy that desire in my heart. You see, I believe God created us with the desire for significance being made in His image, with the desire for contentment by being told to subdue the earth, literally bring contentment to the earth by being blessed by God. God's given us the desire for control. It's called the dominion covenant. You rule the earth. You name the animals. And He's given us this desire for security by giving us every single thing that we need to survive. Every fruit-bearing tree, every seed-bearing plant. But you know, just like the first sin, I pursued significance apart from God, and the more I did that, the more insignificant I felt. I pursued contentment apart from God. And the more I pursued it, the more discontent my life would become. It was chaotic. I would pursue control apart from God. And the more I would do that, the more out of control my life would be. And I even pursued security apart from God. And I just got in the spiral of more and more insecurity. But there was hope. And that hope is the love of God, a love so unmerited, so undeserved that it's called grace. And the Bible tells us that Christ is the grace of God, the love of God. And that love is so powerful, it's greater than our need for any significance apart from Him. And it satisfies our desire for significance. Christ, the Bible tells us, is the peace of God. He makes two one. He reconciles man with God and man with man. And if you want contentment, what you really need is peace. And only Christ, the peace of God, can satisfy your desire. The Bible tells us that Christ is the power of God. And what power you find when you surrender your desire for control to Him. And the Bible tells us that Christ is the truth of God. And when you're searching for security, you just want something to be true all the time. And only Christ is that truth. And so you see, when you humble yourself to God and you surrender your desires to Him, only He can satisfy those desires. He transforms them, He makes them new again, and He uses you to bring the love, peace, power, and truth of God to others as you find your greatest value, like Tom and Carole, to bring His restoration to others and allow God to use you to make them new again. You know, we want everybody around us to be understanding, but sometimes we're not understanding ourselves. And Solomon teaches about this in Proverbs. First of all, understanding is plugged in to the Holy Spirit. We want to be plugged into that electricity of the Holy Spirit and just take 5 seconds and say, hey God, what do you want me to do? We need to be teachable. We need to get somebody farther down the road than we are in wisdom and have them invest in our lives and get the ×2 rule going where someone is investing in us to help us grow in understanding. We need the 10-second rule, not when things get heated, just counting to 10, but taking 10 seconds and deferring all of our anger to God, going to Him once again with 10 seconds and just saying, hey God, what do you want me to do? Proverbs actually says that a man of understanding is cool. And then finally, we need to do the 20-second rule and reach inside. Understanding really is insight that only happens by plugging into the power of the Holy Spirit. We take 20 seconds and say, hey, what were they really saying on the inside? This is just one of the many lessons from Proverbs that Solomon gives us in his purpose of the 12 words to the wise. So I invite you to get your copy of Street Smarts from Proverbs and learn how to navigate through conflict to community.